Hi everyone, my name is Giovanna Proença and today we're going to talk about problem set 6 lines of code of CS50 Introduction to Programming with Python. If you have any question about programming or the career, schedule a free meeting with us, the link's in the description. And we would like to emphasize that this video solution is made for those who have already completed the assignment and want to have an alternative view about the problem. We totally discourage plagiarism. So let's just start here. Basically in these lines of code, what we're gonna work? We're gonna receive a Python file, all right, and we have to read this Python file and count how many lines we have in this Python file. All right, and when I say counting how many lines, we have to exclude the lines that are a comment or the lines that are blank. All right, so we have to think about the white space and if it's starting with a hash, because hash means that it's a comment. All right, so this is what we have to do. Before we start counting the file and working with this, the idea of the problem of the week, we have to do some checkings before. We need to check if we are receiving the correct arguments in our command line. Alright, so for example, if the user just run Python and the name of the file lines.py, this means that we have too few command line arguments because we are missing the name of the Python file that we're going to manipulate. Alright, the second case is if we run Python lines.py and we write another argument like full, that is not a Python file, we have to say that not a Python file. Alright, then if we pass more than two parameters arguments in our command line, we're gonna prompt too many command line arguments. If we pass the two Python files but the second Python file does not exist, we have to say a file does not exist, and if we run correctly we can count how many lines do we have. Alright, this is the main idea to start. So I already created here the days.py. This will be the file that we'll be working with. You can create any file that you want, and in here I added one line with a comment and one line that it's empty, and the other two must return us true. Alright, our code. This is basically it. So before we start checking, and I also did here the pseudocode, the steps we're gonna do, okay? So like I said, the first thing we have to do is check the command line arguments. So how can we do this? Let's understand the sys library. The sys library in Python provides various functions and variables that are used to manipulate different parts of the Python runtime environment, specifically command line arguments. Command line arguments are those which are passed during the calling of the program along with the calling statement. To achieve this using the sys module provides a variable called sys.argv. Let's see this example. Let's suppose we have a file called test.py that looks like this. Import sys, so we're importing the module sys, and we're doing print sys.argv. If we run test.py in terminal doing python test.py red, green, and blue, we can see that sys.argv is a list of command line arguments. So we're printing the list test.py, the first element, the second element red, the third element green, and the fourth element blue. If we try to print the length of sys.argv like the code above, so we're using the same file test.py, import sys, and we're doing print length sys.argv. If we run the terminal again doing python test.py red, green, and blue, we will see that length sys.argv provides the number of command line arguments, so we print the number 4. Finally, if we want to print the first element of our sys.argv list, we can do, again, the same file test.py, we're importing the sys module and we're printing sys.argv on position 0. If we run test.py in terminal doing again python test.py red, green, blue, then we check that sys.argv0 is the name of the current Python script, which is test.py. So now that we saw how can we use the sys library here in our code, let's start implementing, alright? So I already imported here the library sys, okay? And I'm choosing here to create a function where we're gonna call this function to check the command line arguments. So I'm gonna call the function check command line arguments, alright? And this checking function, we're going to implement the idea. So basically we have to check how many elements we have in the command line and we have to check if it's a Python file, all right? Later on, we're gonna check if we can open up the file or not, if the file exists or not, all right? But don't worry right now. So how are we gonna do? We have to check if we are receiving at least 2 elements. This will be the first checking. So we're gonna do in here, if, and one thing that is interesting, let's print first the sys.argv, because sys.argv will be the thing that we're gonna work. So for example, if I run here python lines.py, this is our command line, this is our argv. It's a list that has the name of our file, all right? So the only argument we have here in our command line is the name of the file. If I pass here days.txt, for example, we have now 2 arguments. So we have lines and days.txt. So we're gonna check the length of this list. If the length of the list is only 1, this means that we have few arguments. If the length of the, so in this case, less than 2, right? If the length of our argv list is greater than 2, this means that we have too much files, too much arguments, and this is it, what we're gonna do right now, okay? So we're gonna say if the length of sys.argv is less than 2, what are we gonna do? We're going to exit our code. So to do this here, we have this function that I think they are not specifying in this case, but we have a function that we already used in the previous code, that is the sys.exit. Okay, and the sys.exit will stop our code and we can display a message in the sys.exit. So I'm gonna display this message, to few command line arguments, if it's less than 2. So sys.exit, and the message will be to few command line arguments. Okay, let's test. So if I run here python lines.py, it will display this message, to few command line arguments. Okay, another checking we have to do is if the length of sys.argv is greater than 2, because this is not good for us as well. And we're gonna use again this sys.argv, all right, the sys.exit, to say too many command line arguments, and we're gonna stop our code. So sys.exit, too many command line arguments. Okay, so far so good. Now the last checking we have to do this in here is to check, let's test in here. So if I put full bar, it's appearing too many command line arguments, okay? So the next thing we have to test is to check if our code is a Python file. All right, so I said days.txt, right, but it's days.py. So we have to check if it is a Python file. We need to check if this is an extension of Python. For example, if the user passed txt, this is not a Python file, this is another extension. If it's a Python file, it ends with .py, okay? So this is how we're gonna check. We're gonna say if here .py in our string, so if .py exists in our sys.argv on position 1, we're going to if it doesn't exist in our file. And one thing that is important, let's test. Here, argv is a list, okay? So if we want to access the second parameter of our argv list, we can do sys.argv, and we say the position. So the position 0 will be the first argument, the position 1 the second, and so on and so forth, okay? Since here we want to access the second element, we're going to use the number 1, okay? So let's try it out. If I put here python lines.py days.py, it will tell us that days.py is the element on position 2. And this is exactly what we want to look, okay? So we're gonna say the following. If .py is not in the sys.argv on position 1, we're gonna do a sys.exit, and we're gonna display this message here, not a Python file. Okay, so let's put this in here. And this is it. So now if we test, and instead of days.py put days.txt, it will tell us that this is not a Python file. Okay, so we're done for this checking the command line argument. So how can we read files? How can we open a file and read? So basically here, this is W3 Schools. This is a really good resource, all right? And we can open the file, all right? We can do this fopen, and we put the name of the file we want to open. We use the letter R to say that we want to read, And after doing this, we can use this readLines function, and this readLine function returns a list containing each line in the file as a list item. So we're gonna read the file and we're gonna store every line in a list, so this way we can have access to the content that we have in this file that we're opening. All right, let's understand by this example. If we have a file called days.txt that contains Monday in one line, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, each one in one line, we can read this text file using Python. First, we need to open the text file by storing the file in a variable using the open function. So we create a variable called file, and in the right part we're doing open. The first input is the name of the file we want to read, so days.txt, and the second input is the letter R. That means that we want to read the file. Thus, we can read every line using the readLines function. So in here we do file, that is the name of the variable that is storing the file that we want to read, and we do .readLines open and close parentheses. In this example, we're gonna print what is the output of file.readLines. So the readLines function will create a list where every item is one line of the text file. So in the end we see here Monday \n, the second element is Tuesday \n, the third element Wednesday \n, until that the last element is Sunday. So now that we saw this animation, let's start implementing in our code, okay? So in here we're going to create a variable called file, for example, and we're gonna open this file. So we're gonna say open, and here what is the name of the file is the argument on position 1, like we saw previously. So we're gonna do sys argv on position 1, and we want to read the file, okay? Then this can work, all right, or otherwise this is going to raise this file not found error. So let's use this in our except to be very explicit in which exception we want to display this message, okay? So after that we're able to open our file and we can store our file in a variable. Okay, so to store this file in a variable, we're going to create a variable here called lines, for example, and in here I'm going to use the readLines function. So I'm going to say file.readLines, okay, and let's print lines so far and see what we have, okay? So let's clear. If I do python lines.py days.py, here we have our file days.py, and every line is one element. So say hello, hash say hello, \n, the name blah blah blah, the third element, and the last element here print hello. So we are being able to read our file and store in a variable, okay? Now we have to loop through our code through all the lines we have here, and we have to check if it starts with a hash, because if it starts with a hash, it's a comment, or if it's empty, and we're not gonna count in the end, okay? So in here, let's start doing the loop. So we're gonna loop through our lines list. So we're gonna do for line in lines, for example, and I'm gonna create a variable called like check line, something like this. So I'm gonna say in here, actually, let's do this later. So let's create this function check line. So here we have our def check line, okay, and we're gonna receive as argument the line that we're working with, okay? Then what are we gonna do? We're gonna first check if the line is a space, all right, so it's empty. Why is a space? Like we can see in here, this means that it's a space, okay? And we have a function that in Python that we can use. This is a space function will return us true if it's a space, whatever we're looking for, and it's going to return us false if it's not a space. So we're gonna say if line dot is space, okay, this is the function, we're gonna return true, because this means that the line, we're not gonna count the line, okay? The other condition we're gonna do is this if line, we have to check now if the line starts with a hash, all right? But we can have multiple cases here. In CS50, they are telling us to use the else strip and the stars with, okay? So why are we gonna use this else strip? We're gonna use this else strip to remove the spacing that we have in here, because we can have comments that are starting here, like on line 18 or like on line 20 that has some spaces before. So we're gonna remove this space, okay? And we wanna check if after we're removing this space, it starts with a hash. Okay, and we can use this starts with function that will return us true if we start with whatever we're looking for and return false if not. So it starts with, and here we want to check if it starts with a hash. Okay, and this is also gonna return true because this means that we're not gonna count. Otherwise, if we pass this test, we're gonna return false. Okay, actually I'm gonna change here. We're gonna say check comment or empty line. I think this makes more sense. So if it's comment or empty line, we will return true, and otherwise we will return false. Okay, so now that we have this function, we're gonna use this in our for loop. So what are we gonna do? If this function returns true, this means that we're not gonna count. All right, and if this function returns false, this means that we can count this line. This is not something that CS50 is not allowing us to count. So I'm saying count multiple times, so let's create a variable called count that will count the lines. For example, count lines, you can give this name. And we're gonna do this checking. So if the function check comment or empty line, passing the variable line, is equals to true, if this function returns us true, this means that we're gonna skip. Okay, we're not going to count the lines. So if this function returns true, this means that we're not gonna count, all right? And we can do this here in false. We're just gonna count if this check comment is false, all right? So if we don't return true before, we're going to return false, and this means that we can count. So here we're gonna do count lines plus equals 1. Okay, and in the end of everything we're gonna print count lines, and this will give us how many lines we have in our code. Okay, so why is so good to have another function for us? Because we can do this checking. All right, we can check if it's a space or if it starts with a hash, and if return false, this means that we pass all the tests and we can count. If return true, we're not gonna do anything. Okay, and then by the end of our code we're just gonna return count lines. Alright, so let's try it out. Let me remove this print because this is not necessary. And let's count this file here that we have. So if I run here python lines.py days.py, we are supposed to return here the number true, only to print here the number true. Because the first line is a comment and we're not gonna count. The second line is empty and we're not gonna count. The third line, it's okay, so we're gonna count, and the fourth line, it's okay as well, and we're gonna count. So once we run, it's supposed to return us true, okay? So this seems to be correct. Now let's do check 50. So like we can see here, we got our green, so this means that we are correct. I hope you enjoyed this content. Please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, send here in the comment, or be one of our new students in our community and you're gonna have 24/7 support with our coding experts. Okay? I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.